All right, what's up, guys? I always gotta adjust my camera when I get on here. All right. Let's see here. All right, so we got a lot of interesting stuff to talk about today, guys. I'm going to give you guys a few more minutes, everybody, to kind of join in the chat and everything. So got a video coming out later today. We'll talk a little bit about that. Actually just started reading Motor Preferences for Baseball by Matt Swope, Maryland's head coach, and David Genest. And needless to say, I was down a rabbit hole for about 3 hours last night watching videos on my phone and started to read the book. So as I read that book, Buck B, what's up, man? Buck giving us some good information over email recently that we will get into in a little bit once we, everybody kind of starts joining in. But the motor preferences stuff is fascinating, man. Just instantly, it's one of those things when you start listening to it and watching presentations on it and reading about it, you just instantly know this is right. You just instantly know that, okay, now it makes sense why when I was playing and I was trying to do certain moves or make certain adjustments in my swing, why I would struggle with certain drills, and a lot of guys I played with loved them and were really good at them. To me, the most fascinating thing, obviously, I'm in the very beginning of this, but I'm going to start spending a lot of time at night reading, looking deeper into it, because I just think it's really that, it has that potential to be that kind of revolution in baseball development. Canes, good afternoon. What's up, Canes? Buck, do you have a link for the motor preference video? Yeah, I'll post it in the chat right here. This is I think this is a general. I just posted in the chat. This is a presentation he gave at Maryland, and he even says, it's a 32-minute presentation, and it feels like it goes by in 5 minutes because he's trying to cover, generally speaking, all the topics that they cover in motor preferences. And to me, at the end of that video, I was just like, man, this is really good stuff. You said yesterday we will wait for Canes to begin yesterday's live stream. I started laughing because I never showed up. Yeah, unbelievable, Canes, unbelievable. Unbelievable, Canes, that you didn't show up. But we're gonna get into, guys, the thing to me, Jason, what's up, man? Huge difference from Landon. We do train with ex-South Carolina Chad Kaye. Yep. Is he doing the motor preferences stuff, Jason? But really, what the video I'm putting out later today is about is the aerial versus the terrestrial. And so in motor preferences, guys, basically, long story short, you are born with just innate, unique motor preferences that nobody else on earth has. So and we've when I've talked to you guys about, if a guy's teaching you to do one swing, that's not good, right? Because if he's training you to be like someone else, well, you're not that someone else. And this is the problem that motor preferences kind of attacks, is that one, people fall into two different categories of an aerial versus a terrestrial. A terrestrial works from the ground up. They're very much in their legs. They prefer to be in flexion, meaning your pitchers that when their front foot lands, that you see that front knee bend almost instantly, and they really get down into their legs. Well, if you're an aerial, you prefer to be an extension. So you're going to lead leg block. You're going to have that straight up and down leg when you're at front foot landing, and there's not one that's better than the other. But if you're an aerial and you're being taught to go into flexion deep into your legs, it ain't gonna work for you. and you're probably going to get hurt. And that's what one of the things Matt Swope talks about is that the reason we're seeing so many arm injuries is because we're all one of the things they talk about is that mostly for pitchers, everyone who's supposed to be on the cutting edge of development and arm path and everything like that, they're training in a terrestrial way. So if you're a terrestrial and you're going to like a biomechanics lab, like they're probably going to do really good work with you. But if you're an aerial and you're being trained that much, then we have an issue. You're being trained to be a terrestrial and you're an aerial. That's going to lead to injury because you're forcing your body out of balance, out of its natural state of balance and the natural way it moves, and trying to force it into another type of movement that your body's not used to doing. It's not accustomed to doing. Jason, we are doing the motor preferences now. We are doing the motor preference big velo jump on the mountain. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I obviously I talked with Matt a little bit at ABCA. I was at one of the events where he was on a panel with a couple other guys I know really well, like Chris Colabello from Pelotero. And there was a couple social media, like Out Front Hitting was there. And so it was a really good panel. And listening to Matt Swope and David Janess was on the panel as well. Listening to them both talk about it, it was just like, man, like an aerial typically. So another difference between aerials and terrestrials. Aerials, when they walk, like a lot of their power comes from their shoulders. Terrestrials' power comes from their legs, comes from their lower half. And a lot of aerials, when they walk, if you ever see a guy walking and his shoulder, he's slightly leaned forward while he's walking, it's a good sign he's an aerial. And that's why when I saw the presentation, they go over it, and I always walked slightly with a slight lean forward, and I never understood why. I'm like, why is my natural gait to lean forward, even though I feel like I'm standing straight up and down? I feel like I'm standing straight up and down, but when I watch a video of me walking, I have a slight lean forward. My grandfather was the same way. And so me and my grandfather were definitely aerials, at least in that sense. And so if I was being trained and coached and developed to hit like a terrestrial, man, I'm not going to feel comfortable doing a lot of that stuff. One of the things they talk about is an aerial. If you tell him to get in a deep squat, he's not going to be comfortable doing that. And that was my whole workout experience. I could never have, like, a deep squat was very difficult for me to do. It was not comfortable. I did not like doing it. And then I played with guys who, man, they could almost touch their butt to the ground. They could get in such a deep squat. And I always wondered, like, why am I just, flexibility wise, my body is just not good at getting in a deep squat. Well, now I know. And so as I was watching these videos and starting to read the book, I was just like, one of those things as a former player, you look back and you're just like, man, if I had this information at my fingertips 10 years ago, how much further could I have gotten? Could I have taken that last step to the big leagues? Probably. But again, back then there was no frame of reference for this. This is, and Matt goes into it in some of these videos, but this is motor preferences was actually started over in Europe. Training with like the biggest European soccer teams, a few other sports over there. I think was based in Switzerland. And so this is brand new to the United States. There's not a lot of people even doing this in the United States. And certainly Matt is on the cutting edge of that. And it's pretty awesome to see that, like, basically since he started implementing this at Maryland when he was the assistant coach and now he's the head coach, all of a sudden the program just really, really took off, right? 2 Big Ten championships in a row. They had a 48-win season, had a good year last year. And so what his point is, the problem with development in the United States right now, especially for baseball, is it's not optimization, it's maximization. So what you're doing is you're trying to maximize a guy's physical talents when you're not optimizing them. So essentially, a kid may start throwing harder, but he's being trained like a terrestrial and he's an aerial. He may throw harder, but he's going to be way more likely for injury. And I think, Buck, I don't know if it was you we were talking about, or maybe it was someone else yesterday. We were talking about clean mechanics and how clean mechanics can lead to less injury for pitchers. And after watching these videos, what I realized is like, yeah, you may have clean mechanics for a terrestrial, but if you're an aerial, you're going to be more likely to get injured. And if you're a terrestrial, but your mechanics are in a very aerial sense, so aerials tend to be asymmetric. So your terrestrials tend to be very symmetric. So their arms are going to do the same thing. They work in tandem, you know. An aerial is going to be like, you know, he's going to be like over here. Like he's going to be like not symmetrical at all. And so a normal pitching coach looks at an aerial who's asymmetric and says, oh, well, that's going to lead to arm injury. But it won't for him, or at least it's not nearly as likely to lead to injury for him as it would be if a terrestrial is doing that, because that's how his body is designed and balanced to move. And again, we've been talking about it now for like 10 minutes, and like I've like barely even gotten into I've been in the first chapter of the book. I've watched like a couple hours of videos, and I'm just like, I'm so hooked to learning more about it, because it clears up so much stuff from my career, right? When I look at, you know, aerials tend to be less associated, or they tend to be more associated movers. So with that, an associated versus disassociated mover, the disassociated mover is going to have that really big hip shoulder separation. So someone like Bryce Harper, I mean, his hips are pointed towards home plate and his shoulders are still back here. Whereas one of the examples he gives is Vlad Guerrero Jr. He's a very associated mover, meaning hip shoulder separation is not going to be a lot. And we're all taught as hitters, man, we really want to get that hip shoulder separation as much as we can. But if you're an aerial, you're not capable of doing that. You're not capable of doing it. And it's all on a spectrum, but these are different classifications that people typically fall under. And so myself as an aerial, I shouldn't be working on trying to get more disassociated. I should be working on trying to optimize this associated move and get it to work right. Right? So if I'm an aerial and I'm trying to be disassociated, it's going to be tough. And I'm probably hurting myself instead of helping myself. So, I mean, it was, I listened, like I said, 2 or 3 hours of videos, and it was eye-opening for sure. And I just can't wait to dive into the book later tonight. Is this the book, Motor Preferences for Baseball, a coach's guide to identifying and respecting player strengths to enhance performance and reduce injury? Let me look it up right here, Buck. So I don't give you that sounds right. Man, I got to go to Amazon.com. I got to beat an AI thing. Golly, man. All right, Motor Preferences for Baseball. I mean, it's by Matt Swope and David Genest. David Genest and Matt Swope. A coach's guide to identifying and respecting player strengths to enhance. Yes, that's it, Buck. To me, man, like, this is 100% the cutting edge. In 5 or 6 years, everyone will be doing this. Everyone will be doing this. That was my gut instinct from a very rudimentary, shallow dive into this, and I'm about to just go all the way down to the deep end, bottom of the ocean, looking into this. Because Matt brings up a great point in one of his presentations where he said, you know, there was always those guys that I really felt like I knew what I was doing with, but there was that, you know, percentage of guys that I thought, man, the drills I'm doing doesn't work. He doesn't look good when he's doing them, and I just can't figure him out. And he's like, that was the aerials. He's like, I just had no idea how to coach aerials. And he said I probably hurt guys' careers because they're aerials and I was training them as terrestrials. He said baseball's done a really good job with, generally speaking, with terrestrials. That's how everyone's been trained up until now. And it's, you know, at least not at Maryland, but everywhere else. We've been trained as terrestrials. Well, if you're an aerial getting trained as a terrestrial, you're not going to see the big developments and the big changes in your game because you're training the wrong way. Just bought it. We can do a book club. Sounds good, man. That'll be every day. We'll be discussing the book maybe. But I am going to work on getting Matt on one of these shows. I want to read the book first and reach out to him, because I want to feel like I at least know I've read the book, so I know exactly what's in there, and I've watched a bunch of videos and put 20 to 30 hours into it. But I want to get him on here to explain it, because obviously he's like I mean, as far as Americans, he's the leading edge of this. I mean, um, he's the guy, and he has a business. He has motor preference. I think it's MPE, motor preference. I can't remember what the E stands for, but him and David Janest run that, and so they do assessments for players. To be honest, man, if I had a kid right now and I wanted to do like a real biomechanics assessment, I would go to motor preferences. Because again, a run-of-your-mill biomechanics assessment is going to show you how your body moves, but it's not going to categorize you correctly into how you should be training. Because if they're not looking at you as an aerial versus a terrestrial, they're just looking at you as a baseball player. So if they see, oh, okay, he's not getting real big scap load, or he's not getting a lot of like external rotation with his elbow, well, if you're an aerial versus a terrestrial, that external rotation is good for you versus bad for you. And that getting into scap load is maybe something you can do really well as an aerial or terrestrial, but you can't do well as the other. So a biomechanics lab is going to, again, and this is what Matt even says. He said, there's guys who are throwing harder because of biomechanics lab, because they know how to develop guys' velocity. But that's why you're seeing arm injuries skyrocket, because you have a bunch of guys who are being trained the wrong way, and they are throwing harder, but they're way more injury prone now because you've turned an aerial into a terrestrial. Typically, that's where you're seeing a lot of these injuries, or the aerials are being trained like terrestrials, and so that arm is just not designed according to their body. And the great example, and this will work for all of you guys right now, is just cross your arms. Cross your arms. Okay, now cross them the other way. Like, I can't even do it, right? It's just like, how do I even do this? Okay, so I go like this. Okay. But it doesn't even feel right. That's aerial versus terrestrial. That's a motor preference. Your motor preference is, if I tell you to cross your arms, you'll do it the same every single time. The same is true with your motor preferences. So if you're an aerial and you're being trained to be like a terrestrial, it's the exact same as being told to cross your arms opposite to what you typically do. Now, how's that going to work out? It's not going to work out well, because I'm still trying to figure out how to do it. I'm like, am I doing it? Is that how I do it? Yeah. Like I feel like I'm not doing it right. And it's something as simple as crossing your arms, and now apply that to something as complicated as hitting mechanics, pitching mechanics, everything like that. And Matt even says, he goes, he's like, he's absorbed this information so much, he can look at the opposing team and look at guys, how they walk, how they run, and he can basically put him in a motor preference category. He's like, well, I know where his because aerials versus terrestrials have preferred they prefer vision either high or low. So they're going to see high pitches better, and some are going to see low pitches better. An aerial will see high pitches better. A terrestrial will see low pitches better. So if you identify a hitter as an aerial, you want to pitch him down, right? Or pitch him down in a way. But then there's also horizontal versus vertical. So if a guy's an aerial but he's got a vertical swing, maybe you don't pitch him low. So it's way more complicated than just aerial versus terrestrial. That's like one thing. And then based on that, you go down to the next, and then you go down to the next. And so you have this whole character profile of a player, and generally speaking, what moves will work for him, what moves won't. And again, I've been talking about it for 20 minutes now, and I've just begun looking into it. But you talk about he calls it the cheat code, because he's like, immediately, he said back, before I was into this, you'd see a kid and you think, okay, yeah, let's start him on this, and then it doesn't work. And then like 2 months later, you're trying to figure out, okay, what is going to work for this guy? He said, now I look at a guy, we do an assessment, I know what his preferences are, and I just know exactly how to coach him. Generally speaking, right? I know exactly what he has to do to improve and what's going to work for him to improve versus, something that may make him worse, may make him not as good. So to that was, to be honest, it was awesome just looking into that last night, because it's just not something that again, it was like, I wish this was a thing when I was playing, because it was just like, man. All right, now we're going to get into house settlement issues, guys. And let me see here. Wait. Let me look up here. We're going to get into the house settlement here in a second. Okay. So if those of you guys who haven't seen this yet, there is trouble brewing with the house settlement. Okay. Now that doesn't mean that it's not going to go through or anything like that, but there is trouble going on right now with the house settlement. I'm going to bring this up right now. This guy is really onto it. He's a college athletics attorney, Mitt Winter. Highly recommend following this guy. He's on top of all these lawsuits that are going on. And so we're going to go down here for a second and try to figure out exactly what's going on. So let's see. All right, we'll start with this. The NCAA's eligibility rules are going to be the next subject of frequent legal attacks. There's lots of chatter about athletes who've only played at the D1 level and whose eligibility is up this year filing lawsuits like this. So right now, players who've only played Division I, it's not like they were at a JUCO or D3 or D2, are filing lawsuits for more years of eligibility because they feel like they haven't been able to maximize their NIL. So here's an example, and he says right here, for example, a current D1 basketball player who can make mid six figures now in college might only be able to make $75,000 playing overseas if he's not an NBA caliber player, but he's a good college player that's making good money. If he wants to continue playing overseas, he's not making nearly what he would make in college. So he's going to keep playing college basketball. The season of competition rules, which generally limit athletes to 4 seasons of competition, are arbitrary and potentially violate antitrust law. Because they restrain competition for athlete services and likely don't have any pro-competitive justification. So that's a terrifying statement to read, because what that means is if the season of competition rules are arbitrary and they potentially violate antitrust law, then how many years are guys allowed to play in college? Right? Are you allowed to limit people at all in college? I mean, because if it's arbitrary and it violates antitrust law, then how can you put a number on the amount of seasons an athlete can play? So this is not good for recruiting. I'll tell you that much. This is going to make, if what this guy is insinuating would ever occur, high school recruiting is going to be totally changed. And this comes off of Wisconsin DB. I don't even want to try to say his name. Nazir Forkarine. I probably said that completely wrong. Who played 2 seasons in D2, wants a court to prevent NCAA from enforcing eligibility rules. So right now, this guy, what did we say, guys? What did we say like 3 weeks ago? Someone's going to bring this to suit, who played at Division II, and say, you know what? I want my eligibility back for NCAA for Division I, because now I only get 2 seasons, 1 season to maximize my NIL, and all these other guys got 4. Why do I only get 2? So I mean, it's starting to happen again now. It's starting to happen again where these, and this was, I'll give credit to Buck B. Buck B brought this to my attention. Credit where credit is due. Sent me an email this morning about it. But this is going to be if history repeats itself, these guys are eventually going to cave. The court's going to say, yeah, you're right. There's legal precedent or something like that. And all of a sudden eligibility, and this is what Mitt Winter, who, like I said, I think he's one of the best guys to follow for this. He said the NCAA's eligibility rules for sure are going to be the next subject of frequent legal attacks because everyone's going to try to get as many years of eligibility as they can. So if they're making big money. Buck B, remember the NCAA and pro sports leagues have antitrust exemptions, which is why they are so open to these suits. There's literally no alternative to go to. You're right. Who knows though, Buck? What if they make a power conference with the SEC and the ACC or something? Which again, we've talked about in the past. I mean, there's a 10-year deal that until 2035 or 2034. But Buck continued. He's giving us the lowdown. I'll reiterate what I said a couple weeks ago. College sports has to go to a club model like European soccer, and they'll just license and affiliate with the universities for branding and fans. That's an excellent idea, Buck. I mean, I think it's a really good idea. I actually love, just to be honest, like the European soccer model and how teams can get relegated and teams can get promoted to a higher league based on how they play. To me, it's just so cool how that works and how it maybe a team 15 years ago who was in a lower division is now in the Champions League because maybe they got a new owner and they really started investing and they've climbed their way to the top. I actually love that idea, Buck. It would be interesting to see kind of how that could work. Man, and I understand what you're saying. Like college, they just have to license an affiliate with the universities for branding and fans. That would be sick, to be honest. But again, it's like that. I mean, how complicated would it be to get that done? I have no idea. But I like that idea because I think the European soccer model and how their leagues operate and how you can be relegated. Hey, you know what? Because think about it. The problem in Major League Baseball right now, and in some other sports, is like there's teams that are obviously just not trying to win. Like the owner is making a bunch of money. The team is growing, and the valuation of the team is growing every year. These teams are worth billions of dollars now, and he's like, I'm making a bunch of money. I don't want to spend $300 million on a payroll. We're going to pay $80 million and make money. Well, if you had the European soccer model, the team that finishes last, or the two teams that would finish last in the MLB, or maybe two teams from each league, or one team from each league, would get relegated to a lower division because they were the worst. And then two teams from a lower division would get promoted to the major leagues. What is this? Okay, that was the weirdest background. I don't even know what that noise was. I hope you guys didn't hear that. But now there's really no punishment, and I know Major League Baseball has moved to like the lottery. The lottery, semi-lottery draft. Which I think does it does encourage teams, because now because it encourages teams to spend, because now you're not just getting the number one overall pick if you're the worst team in the game. You're not just getting the number one pick. Now it's, you have a chance of getting the number one pick, but you may get the 10th pick or whatever it is. But I don't think that's enough. I do think the European soccer model is really good. It's got its faults too, but what it's really good at is making sure every team wants to compete and every team is trying to win. Because that's an issue we have in baseball 100%. I mean, there's just owners that do not want to, they don't care about winning. Afternoon, college sports are becoming the Wild West. Zach, man. You know it, dude. They have to be considered pros, can play there as many years as their team wants, and then go up to the MLB, NBA, NFL level if and when they can /want to. Yeah, it would definitely. I mean, that's the thing, Buck. It would definitely make access to college sports like much lower, because if they can play there as long as they want, like you will keep guys who are like 27, 28, because those guys are playing that age in the big leagues. They're playing that age in the minor leagues. And if they're still a really good player, you're going to pay them money. So to me, that would be the one thing that like the courts in the U.S. and a lot of people would be against, and I would be against it too, right? That would be the negative part of it, because I mean, college sports is about you going to get an education and play sports while you're doing it. It's not really about becoming your career. And if that was the case, then college all of a sudden it really becomes a career, because you can make really good money for. I mean, if you're going to college at 18, you're really in your prime. I mean, you're going to be like in your prime baseball playing age until you're like 30. So what, are you going to be there for 12 years? And that means it's 12 years where a new guy not getting a shot. Euro Soccer Academy sign kids at 12, 13 years old. Yep, there are other issues with that, but then you're in the system and play and are paid at the level you get to, or you get up to into the top tier leagues. Yeah. I mean, you're right. The soccer academies sign guys really young. I mean, it's a totally different system than what we're used to, right? I mean, it's just totally different. The Dominican academies and like some of the Latin American academies are kind of similar, but it's still different. Because you're there's no relegation and everything like that. You're just trying to get promoted. But you're right. It's definitely a totally different model than anyone in the U.S. is listening to. Sucks to be a high school baseball player. Schools still don't have money for scholarships. We have punted on D1. JUCO is almost going to be a prep school for D1, 2 years and zero cost. Yeah, I'm 100%, Jason. I mean, that's with all these changes. I mean, D1 and they're pretty much done with them now, but they had to cut guys. I mean, they're like, there's no way we can bring this many guys in if we're limited to 38 in the fall and then 34 by the end of the fall. And so it's just definitely the right move. JUCO or D2 or just somewhere where you're going to get a chance to play right away, and then become a guy that's that portal guy that comes in, that's proven himself, has a track record, spot's yours. Versus coming in as a freshman and now you're competing against that portal guy or JUCO guy who's got that level of experience. There's no, I mean, you may, unless you're just a stud and show out so strongly in the fall that they like, man, we have to have this guy in the lineup. If not, they're going to go with the guy who has experience. Canes, what they need to get rid of is the MLB teams taking the talent from the Caribbean. What do you mean, Canes? I'll read your next one. Make them come to college or make them draft eligible. Oh, okay. Well, the issue for the Caribbean, and certainly all the islands they're different, but you know your main hubs, obviously the Dominican, Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico, the English is better, but in some of the Caribbean islands and obviously in South America and Central America, there's a real language barrier. So with a lot of these kids that sign into the academies in Dominican or wherever it is, like they're taking English classes. And so if these kids were to go to college, a lot of them do not speak good enough English to have any kind of success academically in college. It would just be very hard, just to be frank. I mean, especially those young Latin guys, what you find in pro ball is in, A ball, guys, there's very few guys that speak really good English. I mean, you can communicate, but it's in a very broken way. And most of the American guys, like I became a decent Spanish speaker because of that. And then as you get to the higher levels in AA and AAA, a lot of the Latin American players can speak fairly fluent English. Now they still have an accent and it's still a little bit broken, but they can really, really speak good English. And that's because for years they've been taking English classes and they've been around English speakers and have made that adjustment. But in the Caribbean, at that young of age, it would be very tough to get them in just because of the English barrier. Not for the Florida schools, yeah, and Texas and California. Well, I mean, there may be some select schools where the barrier to entry would be a little bit easier, but still, like your vast majority of schools across the country. And I'll give you an example. I talked with a guy from Korea who is basically a sports agent in Korea, and they're trying to get Korean players over to the U.S. The issue is they cannot go to a Division I school because of the English barrier. They need to go to JUCO. So that could be the route to start for Latin American players. But the Latin American players do not want to give up on their being able to get signed at 16. So they like that. They like the fact that they can sign a big deal at 16 years old, and then start their grind. Now, certainly not all play. I mean, a great example is Ronald Acuna. I mean, he signed for not almost nothing compared to what some of these guys signed for out of the Latin American countries. But Latin guys, they're not going to want to give that up. That's another place, Japan and Korea. And we're starting to see that, right? Certainly in Japan. Japan is ahead of Korea in the English-speaking category, just how well they can speak English and everything like that. And Korea, from talking to this guy, like they just really don't learn English at all in school. And the agency in particular was working with all of their clients they're taking English classes and everything like that. But the English barrier was such a gap. He's like, there's no way they can go Division I. It's just not going to be a fit. But at a junior college, like they should be able to do well enough. So that would be the issue there. All right, so let's go up to some of this other stuff. Okay, so did I just click on something? Yeah, I did. I clicked on it. Okay. Attorney Arthur Bryant explains why he believes the House settlement should not be approved. 1, it waives Title IX claims, and the damages distribution violates the same law. So distribution is, I guess, violating Title IX because more men's sports are getting more money or something like that. The salary cap and roster limits both violate antitrust law. And 3, class members' interests conflict. So there's different, obviously there's, in all the class members, there's obviously different groups of athletes, right? And, some of these athletes are thinking, man, I don't like these changes. I don't want to be a part of this. And some of them are like, no, I want it. I'm going to get damages paid out to me. Like, let's do it. But they're not a unified front is what he's saying. Keynes, you're also right about that. We had a Korean commit from MDC that would always sit with me at the games last season. He was never coming because of the school aspect. He went in the 12th round. Yeah. Yeah, it's just, again, even Spanish is a little bit easier because in the U.S. now, obviously we have a lot of Spanish speakers. And so we've kind of, as a society, we have signs that have Spanish on it as well. And we have, stuff like that. So I think as a society, it would be easier for the Spanish-speaking players to kind of come over to the States in college. Again, there's still a huge gap, but I think we're, as a society, it'd be a little bit easier for us to make that happen. But certainly like Korean, there's not many guys in the U.S. that can speak Korean that aren't Korean themselves. Just not a lot. The objections being filed against the House settlement show 3 things. There will be a lot of litigation even if the settlement is approved. Okay, so hey, buckle up, guys, right? Even if the settlement's approved, there's going to be instant litigation against it. Like files, objections, filing to get it taken away, something like that. So this ain't even, once if it does get approved, it ain't over. 2, a redesign of college sports should directly involve athletes in rulemaking. So from the objections, a lot of the players in this class action lawsuit, they do not believe their opinions were asked. And so a lot of these changes they're objecting to because they're like, some of these we don't need. You're skipping over things that we do need. And so if there is a redesign with a lot of these rules of college sports, like the athletes need to be directly involved in the rulemaking, and they don't. A lot of the athletes in the class do not feel like they were involved. They don't feel like they were asked questions about these things, and even if they weren't listened to. Each sport needs its own redesign process. So maybe these changes are too one size fits all. Like it's too all encompassing with all the sports, whereas a certain sport, maybe they're totally okay with getting some roster size cuts. Maybe another sport's like, man, we can't afford to lose one guy. So like maybe we should allow each sport, and whether that's the head coaches or representatives of the schools that are involved, or like the assistant AD that works with football, coming to those decisions as a committee or a group. We'll see. But there's a lot of objections that are filed against the House settlement, and he thinks these are really the 3 most important things that are coming out of those objections. You can object to the injunction relief settlement's terms, however. All right, we'll start from the beginning. All right, current and former, we'll read this whole thread. Current and former college athletes that are members of the House settlement classes tomorrow's the deadline for opting out of the settlement's damages classes and objecting to the settlement. So right now, they have 1 day to opt out of the settlement's damages, meaning I'm not getting any money. So, I mean, that's an incentive to stay in it, and objecting to the settlement terms. There's also confusing info circulating, so here's what you need to know. Alan, what's up, man? Welcome to the chat. How could the D2 eligibility suit affect the 27 right-handed pitcher that probably is a D2 level? Well, again, it's very early. It just was filed. But Alan, like the way these things have gone in the last few years, like the courts seem to like just kind of side with the player. So if that court determines that his eligibility, his years in D2 should not count toward his Division I eligibility, then you're going to see the floodgates open. You're going to see the floodgates open from all D2 players that are either currently playing or maybe were playing, definitely the ones that are currently playing, filing a lawsuit to gain those eligibility years back. And then you're going to see probably a ruling by the NCAA that the eligibility at Division II, even if you go there for 2 years, you get 1 year of eligibility back Division I or both. So it's very early. I don't want to say exactly what's going to happen because I don't know. But the way these things have happened, the portal, NIL, these were all lawsuits that forced change in the NCAA. And so that's what we're seeing. Zach, NCAA equals non-caring a-holes of America. It's to a point now where each sport needs its own commissioner and set of rules. Yeah, I like that. 100%, Zach. Like each sport in general, and like maybe if you're Division I, you take 5 ADs from the Power Four, 5 ADs from the mid majors, 5 ADs from the Ivies, 5 ADs from the low majors, and then let them hash it out, figure it out what's going on. But then you could see maybe the lower tier, lower division schools kind of gang up on the Power Fours and not want to do some things the Power Fours want to do. So then it would cause. I mean, anyway, it's like we're moving to cataclysmic change, whether that's in 2 years or 10 years when this agreement for the Power Four schools to be in the NCAA lasts. So let's see here. All right, everyone is commenting on this. My 14-year-old is definitely terrestrial preference. Yeah, dude. And Jonathan, isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing how just knowing that one thing, and like I said, in motor preferences, I think there's like 12 things that categories that they put the players in, and like your aerial's typically in certain categories, your terrestrial is typically in certain categories, but there are outliers. But now you know how he wants to function. So if he's in a lot of extension positions and he's a terrestrial, like he needs to get into flexion. He needs to get into his legs more. That's going to help him unlock his power. He needs to be thinking push. Like I need to push off my legs when I'm running. I need to push my hips forward, explode, torque. Right? That doesn't work for an aerial. An aerial when he's running needs to think about bouncy, bounding, like hopscotch. I mean, he's just like real fast. All right, so here's what we need to know. Had to look it up. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of information, man, but it's kind of, I mean, it's actually fun to look into. Jason, could sports go back to old roster limits if the settlement is not approved? I mean, yeah, I guess. I mean, if somehow it doesn't get approved, yeah, it's like all this was for nothing. But then there would be more loss. I mean, the thing is, we are heading towards change. It's most likely that the settlement will be approved, from what I've heard. But even after it's approved, like Mitt Winter is saying, there's a lot of stuff that could come after that as well. So, we just have to wait and see. We just got to wait and see how it happens. First, the House settlement contains 2 types of settlement classes, damages class and an injunctive relief class. If you fall within the class definitions, you can't opt in to either the damages class or the injunctive relief classes. You are already in both classes. So there's no opting in. You don't have to make a decision to opt in. If you're in those classes, you are in them. The only thing you can do is opt out. And he says that right here. But you can't opt out of the damages class. If you opt out, it means you waive your right to receive damages payments from each of the 4 damages classes: broadcast NIL, video game NIL, athletics services payments, and lost NIL opportunities. Man, I want to know what these paychecks are going to look like. That's what I want to know. I mean, I played in 2013. Why did it have to be like 2016 or whatever the date is? I want to know what these checks are going to look like. We didn't have any NCAA video game, though, for baseball, so I'm not getting any of that. Broadcast NIL, they really didn't. The broadcasts weren't that extensive when I was playing. Even though we did start kind of getting on ESPN3 and whatever. So the lost NIL service, and here's how are they going to do lost NIL opportunities? Are they going to look at how a player performed and then look at what a player like that would get now and say, okay, yeah, here's your NIL, here's the payments you get? Anyway, you also preserve your right to sue the NCAA and conferences for those types of damages. You can also file a claim form for the damages class. This isn't opting in to the damages class. It ensures the settlement administrator has your contact info and method of payment. When filing a claim form, if you played prior to July 1st, 2021, you can submit evidence of NIL deals you did after that date to potentially increase your lost NIL opportunities damages. If you played prior to 2021, you can submit evidence of NIL deals you did after that date to potentially increase your lost NIL opportunities damages number. Interesting. With respect to the injunctive relief settlement class, you can either opt in or opt out of the settlement class. That means you can't opt out of the house settlement salary cap, roster limits, or other forward-looking terms rules. You can object to the injunctive relief settlement's terms, however, and those objections need to be filed by tomorrow. You can also object to the damages settlement terms by tomorrow. This is different than opting out. You'll still be in the damages classes if it's approved. So a lot to go over there. I mean, this is, again, we're just at this crazy time in, and we'll go back to the normal screen here, but it's just, again, we're just waiting on a lot of information to come out with these settlements. What the NCAA is going to do. Is the settlement going to be approved? If it's approved, what are the objection and kind of lawsuits that are filed after its approval? If it's not approved, are we just saying, okay, we tried it, never mind, go back to 40-man roster or whatever? To be honest, I can't see that happening. It feels like there's going to be change one way or another, but we're going to have to just wait and see. I mean, it is what it is. All right, so let's look at the SEC preview at D1 baseball. And then we'll be done for the day probably. But we're going to look at this. We're going to see kind of what's the outlook in the SEC. Obviously, an extremely deep conference. So these are the projections for the conference of the SEC. Texas A&M 1, LSU 2, Tennessee 3, Arkansas, Georgia. Look at the rise Georgia's made just since Wes Johnson's taken over. They're a surprise super regional team, regional host last year, really overachieved from what people thought based on the talent they had. And now they're projected to be one of the top 10, 15 teams in the country, be in the top 5 in the SEC. I mean, just an amazing job by Wes Johnson in essentially a year, right? Florida, 6th, Vanderbilt, 7th, Mississippi State, 8th. Great bounce back year from Mississippi State last year. Had a few really rough years after winning a national championship, and it was just kind of mind-boggling. Because usually, when you win a national championship, everyone wants to play there, right? And Mississippi State's got some of the best. I mean, the best, if not, it's a top 5 facility in the country, if not the best. And so great to see them kind of bounce back. Texas. I mean, look how deep this is, guys. Texas is projected to be what, 10th? 9th, Auburn 10th, Alabama 11th, Oklahoma 12th, Kentucky 13th, Ole Miss 14th, South Carolina 15th, Missouri 16th. I mean, this is just, it's crazy stuff. A Kentucky team who was one of the best in the SEC last year, record-wise, same with Tennessee. But let's look at this. So projected regional teams, 12 from the SEC. And this is the benefit of playing in the SEC. Look, I mean, if you're projected to have 12, there's only 4 teams in the SEC that are projected to not make a regional. So the benefit now, this is what you guys have to understand is from an AD's perspective, when you're thinking, all right, is our coach doing enough? If 12 of 16 teams are making a regional every year, making a regional is not good enough. That's not showing us anything special. You need to be hosting a regional. You need to be winning a regional. So this is added pressure for head coaches and assistants, because if you're in the conference that like everyone makes the tournament, making the tournament ain't special anymore. Player of the year, Jace Lavalette. Pitcher of the year, Ryan Prager. Okay, so A&M projected to get the player and pitcher of the year. Freshman of the year, Derek Curriel, utility of LSU. Yeah, I mean, probably probably the most highly thought of freshman in this year's as in total across the country. And so, I mean, expect this big things from this guy. Again, he's a freshman, so who knows? But this guy's supposed to be special. And we don't need to go too much in the weeds here on some of this stuff, but I mean, the SEC is going to be deep. The ACC is going to be deep, right? Let me see if I can find again how many ACC teams were projected to finish or to make a regional. I think it was 10. Yeah. So all right. So so projected regional teams from the ACC is 10. SEC is 12. And 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. All right, BA, what's up, BA? Welcome back to the chat, man. Kyle, for those of us on the West Coast, do you recommend still trying to get into the summer tournaments in the Southeast, or should there be enough exposure with some big tourneys in California? I do think you're going to get plenty of exposure on the West Coast in the big tournaments over there, but I do think like WWBA, like Prep Baseball National Championships at Lake Point, I do think are very good to get to. So you don't need to spend the whole summer on the East Coast, but if you can get to those two tournaments, you're going to see a lot of coaches and you're going to get exposure because you want national exposure, right? I mean, regional exposure is great, but you want to have national exposure. I mean, if a school from the East Coast sees your son and goes, oh man, this kid can really play, like he's not going to be scared that he's from California. He's going to be a little scared because it's probably more expensive tuition coming from California to wherever the school is, but you want that national exposure. You don't need to spend the whole summer on the East Coast, but if you can get to a few big tournaments on the East Coast, that would be best case scenario in my mind. So hope that answers it. But anyway, 10 of 16 teams in the ACC are projected to make the tournament. 12 of SEC teams, 12 out of 16 SEC teams. So 3/4 of your SEC and so 75% of the SEC and like 65% of the ACC are projected to make a regional, right? So that's tough. It's just a lot of added pressure on coaches because, like, okay, you made a regional, like the majority of the conference makes a regional now. And so it's added pressure. Let's see where I want to see one more thing before we maybe call it a day. Let me see here. Let me see if they've come out with the Big Ten. I actually am really interested now. Now I'm like a Maryland fan. I want to see what Big Ten is, what Maryland's projected to do in the Big Ten. All right, we're just going to go to the Maryland, actually. I don't think they've released a Big Ten preview at D1 Baseball. I'm going to have to DM Kendall Rogers and say, where's the Big Ten? And I could just be missing it, but. All right, we have, okay. Got a fall report. We'll look at this for a little bit, and then we'll call it. All right. On January 1st, the Terrapins opened a new $6 million indoor facility, a long overdue investment into a program that has earned that investment through its success in the field, which is a direct result of its success on the player development front, despite the challenges it has had to overcome. $6 million indoor facility. I know they got the force plates. I mean, they got everything you need for the development that they do. So that's awesome. And basically, Matt Swope, his argument is that we may not have the facilities of a UNC or a UVA or a Vanderbilt or whatever, but we have the necessary facilities to coach you, in his opinion, better than anyone else and develop you better than anyone else. So as a player, if you're thinking, I want to maximize my potential, like Matt Swope, there's not many. He may be the best in the country, just to be honest, at developing guys. So we're looking at, man, I just want to see what they're projected to do, man. This guy's name is Jack Wren. No relation to me, I don't think. Man, I just want a overview. Man, where is the Big Ten preview? But I'm interested to see how Maryland does this year. I'll be following them. We'll be following, maybe watch some of their games. But guys, that's it for the day. Remember, if you're looking for recruiting help, scan this QR. Man, I get the wrong. I use the wrong hand every time. Scan this QR code. We'll meet with you. One of our advisors or myself, talk to you about what we do, everything like that. But then also, guys, be on the lookout for that video dropping tonight. It's going to be about motor preferences and go into it a little bit.